My name is Mary Meng. At the time of this photo, I am 16 years old. I would like you to know a little bit about my life. My father Andreas or Andrew Meng was born in 1844, in Denmark. His occupation was a farmer. My mother Botilla or Botild or Matilda Norgard was born in 1850, in Denmark. Most people called her Matilda. Her occupation listed on the immigration paperwork was that of a wife. When they married in 1881, my mother was 7 years younger than my father. My oldest sister, Katerina, or Katie, was 5 years old when they married. Andreas was not her biological father, but he loved my mother and Katie very much. 1 month after marrying, they sold or abandoned most of their worldly possessions and left Europe never to return. They boarded the passenger ship, SS Cimbria, and arrived in New York City in April 1881. Andreas, Matilda, and Katie made their home in St. Helena, in Cedar County, Nebraska, where Andreas' brother Jürgen Meng already lived. The family grew with the births of my siblings, Christina, Peter, Christian, Max, Rasmus, and Henning. That makes 8 children. I am the youngest. Our baptismal records can be found in the Paragon Lutheran Church or Bow Valley Norwegian Lutheran Church books. Today, only a church cemetery remains. I was born on November 2, 1892. My brother, Christian, was born in 1885 and died 10 months later, so I never met him. But I do remember the rest of my siblings. As a child, I went to school. I learned to read and write. A composition book from my school days in the early 1900s still exists. I wrote poems and songs in the book to practice my spelling and penmanship. And there is even a list of pupils who were in my class. Some became family and many stayed friends the rest of my life. We lived next door to the Martin and Gertrude Schmidt family. Martin immigrated to the United States the same year that my parents did, 1881. They had 14 children, and all were born in the United States. Annie and Henry were in my class. I thought that their oldest son, George, was very handsome. We fell in love and I became pregnant. I was only 15 years old when we found out. My mother was not happy about the situation, probably because she faced a similar situation 30 years prior. And I was her baby. My dad was insistent that George and I get married. So, we went to Sioux City, Iowa on February 21, 1909, and were married by a Christian minister at the Woodbury County Courthouse. I was underage, but I wrote that I was 19 years old, and my father vouched for me. When asked about my mother since she was not with us, I said my mother was unknown. George was 22 years old, and I was 16 when we married. We then went to Eagan, South Dakota to live. George had a job at the rock quarry near Eagan. My oldest sister, Katerina, and her family were also there. She had children almost my age. George and I had our first child, Henry Martin, 3 weeks after getting married. What a honeymoon. We lived in Eagan until the quarry work began to dwindle. In spring 1911, we moved back to St. Helena, Nebraska, where our parents lived and helped his dad farm their land. George was the oldest, so the responsibility rested with him. George and I had 9 children. In addition to Henry, we had Catherine, Peter, Gerald, Raymond, Anthony, Leonard, Marlene, and Laureen. Their birth years ranged from 1909 to 1936. That's right, 27 years of having children. Our children gave us 61 grandchildren. From our son Henry, who most people called Hank, and his wife Cecilia, we had Jolene, Gerald, Vernon, Cletus, Joyce, Rose, Jean, Diane, Judy, Larry, Cecilia, Keith, and Myron. We had Mary from our daughter Catherine, who everyone called Katie, and her husband Floyd Marshall. Unfortunately, Mary lived only a month. From our son Peter, and his wife Verna, we had Donovan, Roger, and Charles. Our sweet boy, Gerald, passed away at the age of 3 years old during the influenza pandemic. From our son Raymond and his wife Anna, we had Kathleen. From our son Anthony, who was known as Fuzz, and his wife Lorraine, we had Dwayne, Elaine, George, Mary, Sharon, Dennis, Deborah, Arlene, Lois, Kevin, Martin, and Michael. From our son Leonard, and his wife Jean, we had Kathy, Floyd, Cindy, David, Steve, Carol, Louis, Neil, Jill, and Ross. We had Deborah, Jeff, Ron, Mark, Donna, Darlene, Doris, Jim, Karen, Mike, Tootsie, and Tigger from our daughter Marlene and her husband, Arnold Eskins. Dear Darlene died in the hospital at only 3 days old. And finally, we had Larry, Susan, Laura, Bruce, Brenda, Sally, Lisa, Sheila and Beth from our daughter Laureen and her husband Lawrence Picorni. I think I have too many great-grandchildren to count. But I have been so blessed with family. I lived out my years in St. Helena, Nebraska. George passed away in 1954 and never got to see our youngest 3 children get married and have children. But we had 45 good years together. As I grew older, my youngest daughters and their kids would visit me nearly every Sunday. They would pick fruit from my orchard, mow my yard, and play in the attic. My house and orchard are no longer standing. But you can visit George and me at Immaculate Conception Cemetery in St. Helena. But remember, I was born in 1892 and not the 1890 that is on my tombstone. That's what happens when you lie on your marriage license. I passed away at the Sacred Heart Hospital in Yankton on January 15, 1978 at the ripe old age of 85. I hope you found this brief history of my life interesting. Perhaps, one day, yours will be told.